All right. Well, welcome to today's campaign catch-up. Joining me now, CBN's David Brody, chief political analyst. David, a lot to get to. Our chance here to react to the Harris-Bret Baier interview. How do you think Kamala Harris fared?
So I have a lot to say about this, so I'll try to keep it relatively brief. Well, let's start with this. If you're going to do an interview with Fox News, let alone anybody, you really got to come to the interview prepared with some additional information, substance, a nugget, something for the media to talk about. She didn't have anything. And once again, you know, this line about, she kept saying during the interview, I'm going to follow the law. That was her default. That's the new I'm a middle-class kid. That's become the new I'm a middle-class kid. Like, I'm going to follow the law. Well, thanks, Kamala Harris, for following the law since you want to be president of the United States. So that's reassuring. But look, this is the thing. Every time she was confronted with a past liberal position, she would just go to the default, I'll follow the law. And I was a bit disappointed in Bret Baier that he didn't follow up, because that's a clear layup of a follow-up to say, wait a minute, of course, you're president of the United States, you would follow the law. That's not the question. You know, the question is, are you going to advocate for it? Do you still believe it? Are you going to push for it? All of that, but none of that was there. I thought Bret Baier, I'll be honest with you, he didn't seem like himself, Dan. I don't know about you, but you know, I know Bret. I like Bret. I've been on Special Report many times on the panel. But it really seemed like, I don't want to call it agenda journalism, but he seemed like he was there to kind of pick a fight and to really go after her right from the get-go on immigration. And it just started there and it never stopped. And he wouldn't really let her finish talking. And, you know, it's one thing to interrupt, but he was multiple times interrupting. And I get it, because she's going to go to the whole generic talking points, and it's frustrating as a reporter. But I thought it was a little bit too uber aggressive, especially for Bret Baier, because that's not who he is. I mean, if it's an aggressive reporter, then I'd be like, okay, well, that's who they are. But that's not Bret Baier. So that was kind of strange. And honestly, my final thought on it is that actually I thought, first of all, to be clear, I don't think it's going to move the needle. I don't think it's going to matter. I think everything's pretty, like I said, been saying for a while, the cake is baked, I think. But I do think she looked much better than I thought, because stylistically, she was able to go back and forth with a conservative news anchor. And I think anytime you're able to kind of go back and forth and mix it up with a conservative news anchor, that projects strength. And I think that projects a little bit of tenacity on her part. And I think that's a good thing for her. I think the last thing she needs to be doing, Dan, is do the call her daddy stuff and all of the light fluff stuff. We got it. The light fluff stuff is not where she needs to be. We already know, or she's got a narrative that she's light and fluffy and doesn't have much substance. She needs to go and do this type of stuff. And when she does, when she mixed it up with Bret Baier, I actually thought it helped her a little bit. One last thing, Bret Baier played a clip, of the, it was a clip taken out of context about Donald Trump saying, about how, well, it was about the mental, I'm trying to think, that the enemies from within. It was that clip. And it was a clip totally taken out of context, and it gave her an easy layup to say, Bret, that's not the clip, that you took that out of context. And she was right. So I thought there was some faux pas on Fox's part. I don't know. There's a lot more to say. The Lake and Riley stuff, I want to talk about that. But anyhow, there's a lot. Yeah.
Well, you said it won't move the needle. Is this one of these situations where it's kind of like, because I did see a lot of criticism on the X feed, kind of, mocking a couple different answers that Harris gave, word salad-ish sort of stuff, or just sort of nothing-ish sounding stuff. Is this one of those interviews that, the right is sort of going to use it to sort of mock Harris like they typically do, and then the left is going to say, see, Harris is showing herself as tough and therefore doesn't move the needle? Is that essentially the operating theory here?
Yeah, and I think both sides are doing it. The left will say, certain things in a positive way. Right will say other things. So, I mean, everybody's divided up into their camps. I will say I think she did miss a moment when confronted with Bret Baier. Say, are you going to say you're sorry? Do you owe an apology to the young ladies that were murdered by illegal immigrants? And she's like, I just feel their pain. That's just horrible what happened to them. That's not an apology. What she could have done, Dan, I thought it would have been very effective if she just looked right in the camera and said, Bret, thank you. Thank you. Let me talk to them for a moment. Let me talk to the families. And then look right in the camera, kind of do a turn and say, I just want to let you know, I am sorry. I am fully sorry for what happened. Something like that. Now, that people, I think, in political world will say, don't ever do that. Don't admit it. It's going to be, you're going to look weak. No, I actually think it looks empathetic. I think it looks human. I think it looks honest. I think it looks real. And it jives with what everybody, so to speak, in America, maybe not the progressive left, but many folks in America think. And so I think it just kind of would have been a moment for her to be honest. And that would have helped her. And you know what she could have also said, Dan? She could have looked into the camera and said, look, I am sorry that this happened. And I also think all 435 members of Congress, Dan, need to be sorry as well for not passing the legislation that we dropped in the first couple of days. That would have been effective. She didn't do it. There have been a lot of missed opportunities, Dan.
And then lastly on this interview, David, there was one part at the end that got a lot of reaction on social media, which is when Bret Baier goes out of his way to point out that they're hard wrapping this interview. Harris looked pretty kind of irritated that Bret Baier was sort of pointing this out. I don't know if you took anything from that, but for me, I thought it seemed like Harris was not thrilled that he was pointing out that the team's like, wrap it up, and trying to get the interview to end.
Well, I've been in that situation before, maybe not 4 people, but I've had 2 for sure. And it happens often. You're told you get an X amount of time. And then when you're starting to go over the time, they'll start to wrap. Actually, they start to wrap usually a minute or 2 before. So for example, I usually get, let's say, a 20-minute interview. And in about 18 minutes, they start to wrap. And then you're at 21, 22, and then they're really starting to wrap. So I don't know what the parameters were for Bret Baier. In other words, how much did they have? How much time did he have? My guess is he was probably promised 20 minutes. That's my guess, because the interview ran about 26 minutes. And if they're getting if he's getting hard wraps by 4 people in the room, that's got to be 6 minutes over, and that's way too much for their handler. So I don't necessarily have a problem with it in terms of what the handlers were doing. I mean, my view, Dan, in these interviews for CBN has always been respect the time, respect the clock, respect the people.
I guess what I'm saying is, do you think, because the wrap up thing, I think, because I've been in that situation too, right? And you see them and they're saying, hey, we got to go. But he pointed it out audibly so that everyone watching knows this. And so I was, to me, it sort of made it look like the Harris campaign didn't want to do this interview anymore. It's just getting grilled too much. And then they want to end this thing. And it wasn't just a time thing. So it was a little awkward. So I don't know if Baier just did that intentionally or if that was just one of those moments where he's just kind of like flustered because everyone's in the background sort of yelling,
No, I think it was intentional. And I think it was to protect him and Fox News, because there were a lot more questions he needed to get to. There was a lot more follow-ups he wanted to do. And I think he was trying to make the point to say, hey, they're wrapping me, but I don't want to wrap. I want to keep going. I've got a lot more to say. That's why I think he did it.
Let's talk about the Al Smith dinner here. Harris did not show up to it. She produced a video that had an SNL character from the past on there, and that kind of went over with a big resounding thud. Even Jim Gaffigan, sort of, who's I think a Harris supporter, kind of made fun of that. But Trump's speech is getting a lot of unexpected praise from even people like CNN's Brian Selter, who thought he was, affable at times and, had some good lines that were pretty funny. He poked fun at himself. He said, I'm not going to do any self-deprecating shit. Why take a shot at myself? Everyone else has been doing that already. Like lines like that were really good, that have been getting a lot of play on social media. What did you make of Harris's no-show and then Trump's performance there?
Well, first of all, the self-depreciating humor, that was funny, the shots line. But then he said right after that, which I thought was funny, he's like, no, let me do some self-depreciating humor. And then he paused and he went, I got nothing, which was kind of funny. But look, I watched it. I have a bit of a different take. He did a lot of funny stuff. There's no doubt about it. And it was fine. But he was rude to a lot of folks, not just in the room, but others that were there. I can give you 2 examples. I mean, Bill de Blasio, the former mayor.
That was rough. That was a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Here's the thing. it's supposed to be a funny, you're supposed to have a punchline, but sometimes there was never a punchline. It was just kind of like, oh, Bill de Blasio's here. Boy, he was the worst mayor of New York ever. It's like I kind of thought it was funny just because, and not just funny, but like, it's so Trump. Like it makes sense. He's going to be who he's going to be. And that's refreshing. But I don't know if it really met the moment of the dinner. I mean, he also said that thing about Doug Emhoff, which I mean, I don't know if you know about that.
That one, I saw, it looked like because obviously people write these jokes, right? And then he's looking at this sheet and he's delivering them. And I think he delivered that one. He goes, oh, that was a tough one. Like, he kind of plays it off like, all right, I'm going to read these things. I just want to talk about like the serious problems in America, but we've got these jokes here. And, there were some that had me laughing pretty hard. Like the Walz one actually made me laugh out loud, which is he said, Tim Walz isn't here, but he'll say he will be. It had me laughing. So there were times that I was actually laughing, but I get what you're saying. It's definitely, it was wide ranging in the tone at times.
But I think so overall, is it going to change the complexion of the race? No, it's not.
Right.
But I will say this. I think it says a lot about both candidates. It says a lot about Trump because he will go anywhere, anytime, and speak and talk the same way. And as much as you might hate Trump or not like him at all if you're not a fan, you got to give him props for going into the Lion's Den and other places and just saying what he thinks. I mean, he doesn't have much of a filter, which he could work on, sure. But at the same time, he just does what he does. It reminds me of the first interview. I think I told the story of the first interview I did with Trump, where he's doing it for CBN. This is a CBN interview I'm doing. And I say, what about your church? How's church going? Church attendance, that type of thing. He's like, oh, yeah, absolutely, church, for sure. I go twice a year, Easter and Christmas. Love it. Absolutely love it. It's like, okay, so that's not really the CBN answer, so to speak.
Right.
You would think you would spin that another way. He didn't care. He's just going to say, and it's so refreshing after politicians giving line after line for Trump to just, even if you don't agree with him, at least he says the quiet part out loud, and that's at least something. And as for Kamala Harris, the fact that she didn't shows the fact that she's trying to do not just hope and vibes and joy, but she's trying to play it safe. She's, to use a football analogy, she's in the prevent defense. The problem is she's not winning. So you have to be in the prevent defense only if you think you're winning and you can run out the clock, but she's not. And so it's hard to be in the prevent defense when you are in a tight race or maybe even behind.
All right. Lastly, let's talk about Israel here. Obviously we have Yahya Sinwar getting eliminated, as Israel said, and this was something that was celebrated by pretty much everyone across the board, even the Biden administration. And Harris sort of, in a way, like almost took credit for it, even though this neutralization of this terror leader happened in Rafah, which is, if you remember, Biden and Harris were saying, don't go into Rafah. They were telling the Biden administration this. So, so that you have that juxtaposition going on here. But nevertheless, Iran attacks. Now the word out is possibly Israel's response to Iran, whatever they end up doing, could happen before the election. The timing of that, do you think that changes everything, or are we still in a cake is already baked situation here?
Well, I do think, once again, the cake is already baked, for sure. Having said that, an attack on Iran before the election is not going to help at all as it relates to Kamala Harris's potential of winning. It's just going to show more chaos in the Middle East, and chaos equals bad news for them. And look, if you're Netanyahu, first of all, you're not really thinking right now about the politics. Don't get me wrong. He's thinking politics. Everybody's thinking politics. But that's a little bit more at the back of your mind right this moment. But if it was at the front of his mind, how do I say this nicely? I guess in a New York way. He doesn't give a rip about this idea of timing and a presidential election. He's going to do what he needs to do when he needs to do it. And quite frankly, the deal, Dan. Let's just cut down to brass tacks here. He's ticked off at the Biden administration for trying to tie his hands. And therefore, he doesn't care about protecting Biden or Kamala Harris or the administration. At every turn, America has been saying, this administration has been saying, ceasefire, don't go into Rafah, don't go into Rafah. Listen, if the Israelis had taken the advice of the Biden Harris administration, this war would look completely different. Instead, we've got exploding pagers. We've got Nasrallah dead. We've got Yahya Sinwar dead. We've got so many others. So, I mean, this has been impeccable and impressive by Israel. And I don't think it won't matter a lick in Netanyahu's mind about going after Iran in terms of the election timetable. He's going to do what he's going to do. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if it happens before the election. And the way this has been going for Biden-Harris as it relates to the Middle East, it probably will happen before the election because chaos has been the name of the game in the Middle East.
Yeah, and I'm with you here. I mean, certainly whatever date it ends up being, I think Israel and Netanyahu are done worrying about what the world thinks at this point, given what 100%. Happened on October 7th and what's happened after October 7th. And they have every right to say, you know what? We can't count on anyone right now because, like you said, the ceasefire calls, which is essentially like telling them, hey, lay over and die, because we know they're not going to stop firing, that Hamas isn't going to stop firing. Yeah. So,
And let's also remember let's start with the Bible and just say, how do we say this? Don't mess with Israel. Okay. That's the short version. Go to Genesis 12:3 and you know about who will be blessed and who will not be blessed based on whether or not you're supporting Israel, because God supports Israel for sure.
Yeah.
But beyond all of that, so there's that, and that's kind of like a period end, full stop. But let's just talk a little bit more about it, which is the fact that, look, ultimately, this idea that Israel at every turn, 1948, 1967, 1973, 1987, I can go onward, on and on, every single war, Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, 1948 when they had when they won independence, they were surrounded by this ring of fire that just continues to increase. Their enemies are all around them. What do every single time? They win, and they dismantle every enemy around them. What they need to understand, that's not because of the IDF or the Mossad, it's because of God. That's the reason it happens. But also understand that you do not mess with Israel. So this idea that America is now going to try and tie Israel's hands with ceasefire and all this other stuff, give me a break. Israel will go alone, do it themselves. They have been. They'll take care of business because God is on their side.
Yeah. I mean, go read the Old Testament and see how many times before a battle that, an imposing opposition force is there, and lo and behold, a plague runs through the camp. They hear a noise over here, and then they go running away, and then end up getting defeated, and other armies comes from. God does all these things to make that happen, and you can't help but watch what's unfolded in the last half century here with Israel and come to the same conclusion that maybe something's going on there.
Well, and to be clear, we always talk about the West Bank. The West Bank is Judea and Samaria. I mean, that's biblical homeland, number one. Number two, and maybe it should be number one, God gives the GPS coordinates for that land right there in Genesis. We know that it belongs to Israel. That's the end of the story. So people can say they took my land, I took Jacob and Esau, the whole thing. Okay. But the actual coordinates are given in the Bible. It's in Genesis, as we like to say, look it up, and it's there.
All right, CBN's David Brody. Appreciate you breaking it all down. We'll do it again next week, sir. Thank you.
Let's do it. It's a Friday. I came casual, Dan. This is my casual look. Thank you.
All right.